Great, thank you all for coming this morning. My name is Graham Harding. I'm a historian by profession, well, not by profession because I'm a late returner to academic life after 40 years in branding, marketing, publishing, advertising. But what I'm doing now is a doctorate at Oxford on the subject of champagne in the British market between 1860 and 1914. And this presentation is about the British trade. And where I want to start with is a man called William Hudson. There he is, British wine merchant, champagne expert, and self-proclaimed consumer champion. And what he said was that the relentless advertising of the top brands of champagne made it impossible for the secondary brands of all kinds, including retailer-owned brands, including to gain what was vital, which was space on the wine cards of restaurants and hotel chains. And he insisted that Brandolatry, which was his term for the worship of brands, which he called it, meant that consumers of champagne were paying an unnecessary premium for top-name champagnes, that when they tasted them blind, they couldn't distinguish from the lower-priced, secondary or own-label brands such as his brand, which was ONP, standing for opinion, not prejudice, so taste, not rely on the brand, and he called, as you see, for reform in champagne. And he said this sorry situation had come about because wine merchants had failed to create or to invest in their own labels. And their failure, he argued, disadvantaged consumers and merchants and enabled the shippers of famous names, such as Veuve Clicquot or Pommery, to dominate the value chain to the extent that selling brand name champagne was a profitless trade for most merchants. They didn't make money out of it. So reform in champagne was Hudson's battle cry, and the contemporary wine press said, absolutely, good idea. So people like Hudson saw this cult, and he used that word, a cult of famous brands. But looking back at this period through the lens of 150 years of marketing history, what we see, I think, is a rather different picture. It's one of astute marketing built around a template that exploited exclusive distribution and created the concept of vintage dated wine, backed up by what we today would call PR, public relations, to make champagne an incredibly powerful status marker in Victorian society. I'm not going to talk too much about that. I want to focus on the marketing. But this template that he developed, or was developed in the late 19th century, has not only endured in the champagne trade, really right through the present day, but actually can be said to underpin much of today's luxury brand marketing based on the thinking and the practice of those doing that today. So how did this all happen? Well, first of all, the budgets of 1860 and 1861 cut the duty on light wine, so unfortified wine, and the sales of both claret and champagne increased fantastically. So there is the champagne rise in volume sales. You can see from 1860, it climbs like that. And when the sales boom peaked in the mid-1870s, the British champagne trade was dominated by a group of 15, 20 premium brands, the names we know today, Moët Chandon, Veuve Clicquot, Pommery, Roederer, whose names are increasingly widely advertised. And so what I'm doing here is, this is from the British provincial press, looking at the incidence of branded wines. So when the wine in the merchant advertising had a name to it, had a brand name, and you can see champagne completely dominates. Green is port, claret is the sort of other brown one there, so the colours haven't come up very well, but you can see champagne brands dominate the marketplace. And the proportion of press advertising featuring brand names rose steadily from 1850 to 1870 and then went up again, so very fast. So this trend was increased yet further by the consumer trend towards and the marketing of vintage dated wines. So again, you see this is the advertising, so this is champagne is the blue there, and this is premium brand names, and you see that power that they had. And what that enabled them to do was to create this illusion of scarcity, which is central to luxury brand marketing. If you think something is widely available, then it's not a luxury product. So you can see vintage dates rose from 1870, 1874 was the first real vintage wine champagne marketed as such, rose very fast, and then falls away, actually because the vintages just before the First World War were pretty unsuccessful. So that illusion of scarcity is central. But what I want to do now is to turn to the impact of those brands, their marketing activity. And I think it had three effects. Number one was really establish the hegemony of the premium brands. Secondly, it created the ability of the premium brands to price maximize and to raise prices consistently. And third, as Hudson had feared, it led to the almost complete marginalization of retailer-owned brands. So I want to demonstrate the effectiveness of these premium brands by the failure of two challenger brands. First one, Veuve Monnier, created by an English entrepreneur with French connections, and what he did was he had a lot of PR. So he did things like an 1890 market research survey of brands, which he typified from the corks, picked up at the Epsom racecourse, so the most important horse racing event of the season. And surprise, surprise, his brand came top with 17 out of 167 mentions. And the trade press did remark on this. But he paid listing fees of up to £500 per year to hotels, restaurants, to get his wine on their lists, with no guarantee of sales, which led, predictably, to bankruptcy. Anyway. But the second company was Laurent-Perrier. This was their UK agent, I think, rather than the house, who created this wine, sans sucre, no sugar. And this tapped into the consumer trend, desire for wines with low sugar content, and they use press advertising, which stress the low sugar content, which talk about its naturalness. They have an endorsement there, Dr. Mortimer Granville, his book on gout, so this has got medical endorsement, and later adverts had lots of the crowned heads of Europe saying, this is good stuff. And the second thing he did, epitomized there, which is consumer promotions, and this was a promotion where, again, you collected corks, you sent them in, and it was quite clearly from the prizes aimed at least as much as women as at men, and for the trade press this was dangerous. This smacks of appealing to the demi-monde, so they were very concerned about this. And Sans Sucre, despite big advertising, despite innovative consumer promotions and consumer advertising, did not work. It survived in France, but not in Britain. And yet, both these brands were 25 to 30% cheaper than the big competitors. So that failure suggests another thing, which is that ability to consistently raise prices, which was key to the success of the trade as a whole and the premium brands in particular. So those brands had a 15, 20, 25% premium. You joined what people call the magic circle. You put your price up instantly. And the London agent of the most successful of those, this man, Adolphe Hubinet, from Pommery, he was stressed in his letters that Pommery was not only the most fashionable brand in Britain, but the most expensive. And for him, this was a crucial marker of the success of his brand. So in 1890, he runs back to his principles in Reims, saying, We're on the wine list at 2 shillings more per bottle than any of our competitors. That is so important. I've tried, he said, for years to get to this position. It's absolutely crucial. So, if you then look at what he did not advertise in the consumer press. But what he did do was he used a lot of PR and he used elite distribution. So if you look at the PR, this is a cartoon from Punch, the British satirical magazine, which was, all the elite of society, the middle class read it. And so there you see Pommery first in line. And this is reserves the Derby Day races. So there are other brands there, but Pommery takes the cake, as it were. And that, very briefly, is Punch's cartoons, 1875, 1900. You see all alcohol, all champagne, all other alcoholic drinks, branded champagne, 24 brands of champagne featured in the magazine. All other alcoholic brands, 12 in total, which was 2 beers, 2 whiskies, and that was it. So champagne, in its PR, dominated the marketplace. And the effect of all this was to drive out the merchant-owned brands. So the trade press, as I said, consistently urged merchants, stop pandering to the, quotes, foreign brand system, because they said, this will, if you just focus on the French houses, you, the merchants, will just be penny in the slot machines, was what they said. And the failure of the own brands is actually very well summed up by what happened to Gilbey's. This was the preeminent distributor of wine in Britain in the 19th century. 10%, maybe even 15% of the market in total. And they were its own brand. So it was the Castle brand, the Castle brand, the Castle brand. Everything was Castle branded. Probably the most effective range brand ever in the history of the wine trade. And they had to concede in champagne. They gave up their own brand and they switched to what they call the celebrated brands. And there you can see them, Ayala, Veuve Clicquot, etc. So the brands had won, and this was in the mid-1880s. So if I look back at what they were doing, compare it with what, and I've used John Noel Caprara's encapsulation of modern luxury marketing, who has this series of what he calls the anti-laws of marketing in an article called Abundant Rarity, which is brilliant. So he talks about the illusion of scarcity. He talks about the importance of price maximization as a marketing tool, the importance of elite distribution. Avoid product advertising, he says, focus on the house brand. And, that is exactly what the agents of the premier houses were doing in London in the 1860s and 1870s. So, in this very brief paper, I hope you can see not the Brandolatry that Hudson referred to, but actually some very sharp marketing that prefigures the luxury brand marketing of the 20th and 21st century. So, thank you all very much indeed.